Julia Vaughn's wine glass froze midway to her lips as her date uttered words that made her stomach sink. Honestly, I'm just here because my mother wouldn't stop pestering me about meeting her friend's daughter. No offense, but you're not really my type. She stared at the man across from her, a corporate lawyer named Richard, who had spent the last 45 minutes checking his phone and making thinly veiled comments about her modest career as a marine biologist. This was officially the worst date she'd ever been on, and that was saying something. "None taken," she replied, forcing a smile while discreetly checking her watch. Only 15 minutes had passed since they'd ordered their wine. It felt like an eternity. At the bar across the dimly lit room of Lavine, one of Manhattan's most exclusive wine bars, Kieran Grayson sipped his Chat Neuf du Pape while reviewing property acquisition documents on his tablet. He hadn't intended to work during his rare evening off, but old habits died hard when you were responsible for a global shipping empire worth billions. The woman's laughter forced and hollow caught his attention. Something about the strained sound made him glance up from his work. She was beautiful, with chestnut hair that fell in loose waves past her shoulders and a green dress that complemented her eyes. But it was the look of barely concealed distress on her face that truly captured his interest. "You know," the man across from her continued loudly enough for Kieran to hear, "I usually date models. It's refreshing to meet someone so natural." Kieran winced at the backhanded compliment. The woman's smile tightened as she took a larger sip of her wine. "I'm sure it must be," she replied. "Though I find my work with endangered marine species quite fulfilling, not everyone can appreciate the importance of ocean conservation. Right, fish and stuff, very noble, but doesn't it get boring? And the pay must be terrible." The man checked his phone again. "Sorry, just checking on a client matter." Kieran had heard enough. He wasn't normally one to interfere in strangers' affairs, but something about this woman's quiet dignity in the face of such rudeness stirred something protective in him. Before he could reconsider, he found himself sliding off his bar stool and approaching their table. "Julia," he said confidently, as if they were old friends. He'd overheard her date use her name earlier. "I thought that was you. What a wonderful surprise." Julia looked up, confusion evident in her green eyes. Kieran gave her a subtle wink that her date couldn't see. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," he continued smoothly, extending his hand to the baffled man. "Kieran Grayson. Julia and I go way back." "Richard Perkins," the man replied automatically, shaking Kieran's hand with visible annoyance. Kieran turned back to Julia. "I hate to intrude, but I just received some urgent news about the Caribbean Reef project that can't wait. Could I borrow you for just 2 minutes? It's about the funding." Understanding dawned in Julia's eyes. "Of course," she said, standing quickly. "Richard, would you excuse me for just a moment? This is important for my research." Richard waved a dismissive hand, already returning to his phone. "Take your time. I need to check these emails anyway." Kieran guided Julia toward the bar, keeping a respectful distance but close enough to speak privately. "Thank you," she whispered once they were out of earshot. "But how did you know?" The entire bar could hear his charming commentary, Kieran replied with a wry smile. "I'm sorry to intervene, but you looked like you might appreciate an escape route." Julia laughed, a genuine sound this time that made Kieran's smile widen. "My knight in shining Armani, I owe you one. No need. Though if you'd like to make a clean getaway, I could tell the bartender to call you a car. Or..." He hesitated before continuing. "There's a little wine bar around the corner with excellent small plates, much quieter than this place. You could tell your date there was an emergency with your reef project." Julia studied him, wariness battling with intrigue in her expression. "That's very kind, but I don't even know you." "Fair point." Kieran offered his hand. Kieran Grayson, shipping and logistics. I promise I'm not normally in the habit of rescuing strangers from bad dates, but that guy was particularly obnoxious. She smiled, taking his hand. Julia Vaughn, marine biologist who apparently isn't a model and should be grateful for this refreshing date experience. His loss entirely, Kieran replied seriously. Look, no pressure. You can take the exit strategy and go home, or we could have one glass of wine somewhere else while you recover from this experience. Either way, I think you should definitely escape. Julia glanced back at Richard, who hadn't even looked up from his phone. You know what? I think I will take that exit and maybe that glass of wine too. Kieran's smile reached his eyes this time. Excellent decision. Julia returned to the table, gathering her purse. I'm so sorry, Richard, but there's an emergency with our research funding. I need to go make some calls right away. Richard barely looked up. Oh, well, it was nice meeting you. I'll tell my mother we gave it a shot. You do that, Julia replied, not bothering to hide her relief as she walked away. Outside Levine, the cool autumn air felt like freedom. Julia took a deep breath, turning to Kieran with a genuine smile. That was the most painless escape I've ever made from a bad date. Thank you. My pleasure. The wine bar is just 2 blocks this way if you're still interested. As they walked, Julia studied her unexpected savior. Tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair and striking blue eyes, he moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin. His suit was impeccably tailored but worn with a casualness that suggested he wasn't trying to impress anyone. So, shipping and logistics, she prompted. Not the most exciting conversation starter, I know, he replied with a self-deprecating smile. Grayson Maritime handles international shipping routes, specializing in eco-friendly transport solutions. Julia's eyebrows rose. Eco-friendly shipping? That's actually very interesting to me. My research focuses on the impact of global trade routes on marine ecosystems. Then I should be picking your brain rather than the other way around, Kieran said, looking genuinely interested. We've been working on reducing our carbon footprint and minimizing disruption to marine habitats. They arrived at a small, warmly lit establishment with Vino e Vita written in elegant script above the door. Inside, the atmosphere was cozy and intimate, with soft jazz playing and small clusters of comfortable seating. This is lovely, Julia said as they were led to a quiet corner table. It's one of my favorites, family-owned, excellent wine selection, and they never rush you out. Kieran handed her a menu. What do you prefer, red, white, sparkling? Red, usually, though after that date experience I might need something stronger. Kieran laughed. They do make an excellent Manhattan. After they ordered a Barolo for Julia and a neat scotch for Kieran, she leaned back in her chair, studying him. So, do you make a habit of rescuing women from terrible dates, or was I just lucky? Definitely not a habit. But he was being particularly awful, and you looked too polite to just walk out. Kieran's expression turned curious. How did you end up on a blind date with someone so clearly wrong for you? Julia grimaced. His mother and my aunt are friends. They've been trying to set us up for months, and I finally ran out of excuses. She shrugged. Dating is hard enough without the added pressure of family matchmaking. I can relate to that. My mother has a habit of accidentally inviting eligible women to family events. Their drinks arrived, and Julia took an appreciative sip of her wine. This is excellent. You have good taste. In wine and in rescue missions, apparently, Kieran replied with a smile. So, tell me about this Caribbean reef project. Is that real? Or did I inadvertently create fictional marine research? It's very real, actually. I'm leading a study on coral reef restoration techniques in areas damaged by shipping routes and climate change. Julia's eyes lit up as she spoke about her work. We're developing new methods to accelerate coral growth and increase resilience against rising ocean temperatures. Kieran listened attentively, asking thoughtful questions that showed genuine interest. Julia found herself relaxing, the tension from her earlier date melting away as they discussed everything from marine conservation to their favorite books and films. 2 hours and several glasses of wine later, Julia realized she was actually enjoying herself. Kieran was intelligent, funny, and surprisingly knowledgeable about environmental issues. "You know," she said, "for someone who runs a shipping company, you're very well informed about marine conservation. My company has a significant impact on the ocean." "I believe that comes with responsibility," he replied simply. "Besides, I grew up sailing with my father. The ocean has always been important to me." "That's refreshingly ethical," Julia admitted. "Most corporate executives I meet view environmental regulations as obstacles rather than responsibilities." Kieran's expression turned thoughtful. "My father built Grayson Maritime from nothing. When he passed away 5 years ago, I promised myself I'd grow the company without compromising his values or my own." The genuine emotion in his voice touched Julia. There was something about Kieran that felt authentic in a way she rarely encountered, especially in New York's dating scene. As the evening drew to a close, Kieran insisted on calling her a car. Standing outside the wine bar waiting for it to arrive, Julia found herself reluctant for the night to end. "I should thank you again," she said. "This evening turned out much better than expected." "I enjoyed it too," Kieran replied, his blue eyes warm in the glow of the street lights. "Would you like to do this again sometime? Preferably without the bad date rescue scenario first." Julia smiled. "I'd like that." They exchanged numbers just as her car pulled up. Before she got in, Kieran gently touched her arm. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "any man who can't see how fascinating you are doesn't deserve your time." The sincerity in his voice caught Julia off guard, warming her from the inside. "Good night, Kieran." "Good night, Julia." As her car pulled away, Julia found herself smiling. She had entered the evening dreading another disappointing date, only to end it with unexpected butterflies in her stomach. Whatever Kieran Grayson's story was, she was suddenly very interested in learning more. What she didn't know was that Kieran was already making it his mission to see her again, and soon. The next morning, Julia arrived at her office at the Marine Conservation Institute to find a delivery waiting at the reception desk. Inside an elegant blue box was a bottle of the same Barolo they'd shared the night before, accompanied by a handwritten note. "Julia, thank you for turning a simple act of chivalry into one of the most enjoyable evenings I've had in a long time. I meant what I said about doing this again." "Kieran, secret admirer?" asked her colleague and friend Sophia, peering over her shoulder. Julia felt her cheeks warm as she tucked the card away. "Not exactly. Just someone I met last night. Someone who sends expensive wine to your workplace the next day." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Must have been quite the impression you made. Spill the details." "There's not much to tell," Julia insisted, though she couldn't help smiling. "My blind date was terrible and this guy stepped in to help me escape. We had a drink after, that's all. And now he's sending gifts." "Very romantic," Sophia said with a knowing grin. "Are you going to see him again?" Before Julia could answer, her phone buzzed with a text message. "Too forward with the wine. Just wanted to make sure you knew I was serious about seeing you again. Dinner this Friday." Julia bit her lip, hesitating before typing a response. The wine was perfect. "And yes to Friday. Send me the details." She pressed send before she could overthink it, then looked up to find Sophia watching her with amusement. "I'll take that smile as a yes," her friend said. Now, are you going to tell me more about this mystery man, or do I have to investigate myself? His name is Kieran Grayson, Julia relented. He works in shipping. Sophia's eyes widened. Wait, Kieran Grayson of Grayson Maritime, the shipping billionaire. Julia nearly dropped her phone. What? No, that can't be right. Tall guy. Dark hair, blue eyes, obscenely handsome in that I don't even try kind of way. Yes, but... Julia frowned. He just said he works in shipping and logistics. He never mentioned being a billionaire. Julia, Kieran Grayson is on the Forbes list. Grayson Maritime is one of the largest shipping companies in the world. Sophia pulled out her phone and quickly searched, then turned the screen toward Julia. Is this him? Julia stared at the image of Kieran in a business suit, looking polished and professional at what appeared to be a charity gala. It was definitely the same man who had rescued her last night. I had no idea, she murmured, feeling suddenly out of her depth. He seemed so normal. Well, I've heard he's pretty down to earth for a billionaire, Sophia said. And apparently he's big on environmental initiatives. His company has won awards for sustainable practices. Julia's mind was reeling. The man she'd spent hours talking with, who had seemed genuinely interested in her work and opinions, was actually one of the wealthiest men in the country. Why hadn't he mentioned it? Her phone buzzed again with another message from Kieran. I should have been more upfront about who I am. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow so I can explain properly? I understand if you're reconsidering Friday now. Julia stared at the message, surprised that he'd somehow read her thoughts. She took a deep breath before replying, tomorrow works. And I'm still processing the billionaire revelation, but Friday is still on. For now. His response came quickly. Thank you for giving me the chance to explain. I'll pick you up at 7. Julia sent her address, then put her phone away, trying to focus on the day ahead. But her mind kept drifting back to Kieran Grayson, the billionaire who had rescued her from a bad date, and somehow made her feel more seen and heard than anyone had in a very long time. The following evening, Julia found herself nervously checking her appearance one last time before Kieran arrived. She'd opted for casual elegance dark jeans, a silky emerald blouse that brought out her eyes, and low heels. Professional but not stuffy, attractive but not trying too hard. At precisely 7 o'clock, her doorbell rang. When she opened the door, Kieran stood there in dark jeans and a light blue button-down shirt that matched his eyes, holding a small potted plant rather than the typical flowers. Hi, he said with a slightly nervous smile that somehow made him more approachable than his billionaire status would suggest. I brought you this instead of cut flowers. It's a rare species of coastal succulent supposedly impossible to kill, even for those of us without your green thumb. Julia couldn't help smiling as she accepted the plant. It's perfect, thank you. Come in for a minute while I find a place for it. As Kieran stepped into her modest Brooklyn apartment, Julia tried to see it through his eyes, the overflowing bookshelves, the collection of shells and sea glass on the windowsill, the framed photos of her diving in various oceans around the world. It was cozy and personal, but a far cry from what she imagined a billionaire was accustomed to. You have a beautiful home, Kieran said, examining her bookshelves with genuine interest. I love your collection of marine biology texts. Some of these are quite rare. They were my father's, Julia explained, placing the succulent on her kitchen windowsill. He was a marine biologist too. Kieran nodded, stopping before a framed photo of Julia with an older man on a research vessel. Is this him? Yes, he passed away 3 years ago. Julia joined him, looking at the photo with a sad smile. He would have loved your succulent. He always said anyone who brings plants instead of flowers understands the value of living things. He sounds like a wise man, Kieran said softly. "I'm sorry for your loss." The genuine empathy in his voice touched Julia. "Thank you. Should we go? You still owe me an explanation about this whole billionaire situation." Kieran smiled ruefully. "I do. I've made reservations at a place that should be quiet enough for conversation." "Lead the way, Mr. Billionaire," Julia said, grabbing her purse and jacket. Kieran winced slightly. "And there it is. That's exactly what I wanted to avoid." Downstairs, a sleek black Tesla waited at the curb but no driver. Kieran opened the passenger door for Julia. "You drive yourself?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. "Whenever possible," he confirmed, sliding into the driver's seat. "I find it meditative. And before you ask, yes, I take the subway sometimes too. Living in a bubble isn't good for anyone, especially not someone running a global company." As they drove through Brooklyn toward Manhattan, Julia studied his profile. "So, billionaire," Kieran sighed. "Yes, though I prefer person who happens to run a successful company over labels based on net worth." "Why didn't you tell me the other night?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Because the moment people hear billionaire, everything changes. Suddenly, I'm not just Kieran anymore. I'm a bank account, a potential investor, a status symbol, or someone to resent. I wanted you to get to know me as a person first." Julia considered this. "I can understand that. But it still feels like a pretty significant detail to omit." "You're right," he conceded. "I should have found a way to tell you before you had to find out from someone else. I'm sorry for that." The sincerity in his apology disarmed her. "So what else should I know about you that might come up in a Google search?" Kieran's lips quirked up. "Let's see. I inherited majority control of Grayson Maritime when my father died 5 years ago, though I'd been working there since college. The company has grown substantially since then. I'm on several charitable boards. I have a beach house in the Hamptons that I rarely use, and an apartment in Manhattan that's embarrassingly large for one person. Oh, and apparently I was named one of New York's most eligible bachelors last year, which my mother found hilarious and hasn't stopped mentioning since." "Quite the resume," Julia remarked, trying to process all this new information. "Your turn," Kieran said, glancing at her. "What would I find if I Googled Julia Vaughn?" "Much less exciting results," she replied with a small laugh. "Publications in marine biology journals, my dissertation on coral reef ecosystems, maybe some photos from research expeditions. I lead a pretty quiet life compared to New York's most eligible bachelor." "I think your life sounds fascinating," Kieran said seriously. "You're doing work that actually matters." They arrived at a discreet restaurant tucked away on a quiet street in the West Village. Inside, the atmosphere was intimate and unpretentious, with exposed brick walls and soft lighting. "This is one of my favorite places in the city," Kieran explained as they were led to a corner table. "Family-owned for 3 generations. They don't care who you are or how much money you have, they just care if you appreciate good food." As they settled in with menus, Julia studied Kieran across the table. "So, this is where you bring all your dates when you need to explain that you're secretly a billionaire." Kieran laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "You're the first, actually. Most women I date already know who I am. That's usually why they agreed to the date in the first place." "That sounds cynical. Just realistic. When your family has money, you learn early to question people's motivations." He took a sip of water. "That's why the other night was so refreshing. You had no idea who I was, yet you still seemed to enjoy my company." "I did," Julia admitted. "Though I'm still processing the fact that the guy who rescued me from a bad date could probably buy the entire wine bar if he wanted to." "I prefer to earn things rather than buy them," Kieran said quietly, his blue eyes meeting hers. "Including someone's trust." The intensity of his gaze made Julia's heart beat a little faster. She was saved from responding by the arrival of their server, who greeted Kieran by name and recommended several specials. After they ordered, Julia leaned forward. "Okay, I have to ask, what's it like being a billionaire?" Kieran considered the question carefully. "Complicated. There are obvious advantages: financial security, opportunities, the ability to support causes I care about. But there are downsides too. People make assumptions. Relationships become transactional. There's a constant pressure to live up to expectations you never set for yourself." "That sounds lonely," Julia observed. "It can be," he acknowledged, "which is why I value authenticity when I find it." He studied her for a moment. "Can I ask you something now? Seems fair. Now that you know about my financial situation, does it change how you see me?" Julia took a moment to consider her answer. "I'd be lying if I said it didn't change anything. It's a lot to process. But I enjoyed talking with you the other night because you were intelligent, thoughtful, and genuinely interested in my work. That hasn't changed." Kieran's expression relaxed slightly. "Thank you for your honesty." Their food arrived, perfectly prepared Italian dishes that lived up to Kieran's praise. As they ate, the conversation flowed naturally from work to family to favorite travel destinations. Julia found herself relaxing again, forgetting momentarily about Kieran's wealth, as they debated the merits of different diving locations and laughed over shared experiences with overzealous family matchmaking. "My mother once invited 3 different women to the same family dinner," Kieran revealed, shaking his head at the memory. "It was mortifying for everyone involved. That beats my aunt's attempts to set me up with her dental hygienist's nephew," Julia laughed. "Though last night's lawyer disaster might take the crown for worst setup ever." "I'm rather grateful for that disaster," Kieran admitted with a warm smile. "Otherwise we wouldn't be here now." As the evening progressed, Julia found herself drawn once again to Kieran's intelligence and quiet confidence. He listened when she spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and seemed genuinely interested in her opinions. His wealth, while impossible to completely ignore, began to feel less important than the connection they were forming. After dinner, they walked along the quiet streets of the West Village, the early autumn air crisp but not yet cold. "I meant to ask," Julia said as they strolled, "how did you know I was having second thoughts about our date after finding out who you are? Your text was perfectly timed." Kieran looked slightly embarrassed. "I figured your colleagues would recognize my name, and I should have been upfront from the beginning. I wanted to give you the chance to reconsider before you felt obligated. That was surprisingly considerate. I try to be." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Julia, I've enjoyed these 2 evenings more than any dates I've had in years. I'd like to keep seeing you, but I understand if my situation makes you uncomfortable." Julia studied his face in the soft glow of the street lamps. "I'm not uncomfortable, Kieran, just adjusting. I've never dated anyone with your kind of resources before. Would it help if I promised never to bring it up or flaunt it in any way?" he asked with a hopeful smile. Julia laughed. "That might be a bit extreme. How about you just keep being the person you were the other night, the one who cared enough to rescue a stranger and then actually listened when she talked?" "I can definitely do that." Kieran's expression turned serious. "But I want you to know something: my interest in you has nothing to do with charity or novelty or any other motive you might be questioning. I'm drawn to your passion, your intelligence, and your authenticity. That's rare in my world." The sincerity in his voice made Julia's breath catch. "Thank you for saying that." They had reached a small park where a street musician was playing soft jazz on a saxophone. Without thinking, Julia slipped her hand into Kieran's. His fingers tightened around hers, warm and reassuring. "Is Friday still on?" he asked quietly. Julia nodded. "Definitely. Though I think I need to know where we're going so I can dress appropriately. No surprise galas or yacht parties, please." Kieran laughed. "Nothing so elaborate. I was thinking we could visit the new marine life exhibition at the Natural History Museum. I have access to a private viewing after hours if you're interested. And before you ask, it's because I'm on the board of trustees, not because I paid for special treatment." A museum date. Julia couldn't hide her surprise and delight. "That sounds perfect." They walked back to his car hand in hand, the air between them charged with possibility. When they reached Julia's apartment, Kieran walked her to her door. "Thank you for giving me a second chance," he said softly. "Thank you for being worth it," Julia replied. Their eyes met, and for a moment Julia thought he might kiss her. Instead, Kieran gently squeezed her hand. "Good night, Julia. I'll see you Friday." As Julia watched him walk away, she realized that despite her initial shock at discovering his wealth, she was more intrigued by Kieran Grayson than ever before. There was depth beneath the billionaire label, a thoughtfulness and integrity that drew her in despite her reservations. Friday couldn't come soon enough. On Friday evening, Julia found herself standing in front of the imposing entrance to the American Museum of Natural History, waiting for Kieran. The museum had officially closed an hour earlier, but Kieran had arranged for a private viewing of the new marine life exhibition. She smoothed down her navy blue dress, a simple but elegant knee-length design that she hoped struck the right balance between professional and date-appropriate. The past 2 days had been a whirlwind of emotions as she tried to reconcile the Kieran she'd connected with against the reality of his wealth and status. "You look beautiful," Kieran's voice came from behind her. Julia turned to find him approaching, dressed in charcoal pants and a forest green sweater that gave him a more casual appearance than their previous meetings. "Thank you," she replied, feeling suddenly shy. "This is quite the date venue. I hoped you'd approve." He gestured toward the entrance where a security guard was waiting. "Shall we?" Inside, the grand halls of the museum were eerily quiet without the usual crowds of visitors. Their footsteps echoed on the marble floors as the guard led them toward the special exhibition hall. "I've never been in a museum after hours," Julia admitted, looking around in wonder. "It's magical. I thought you might enjoy seeing the exhibition without having to fight through crowds," Kieran explained. "And selfishly, I wanted your undivided attention." The exhibition itself was breathtaking, a comprehensive display of marine ecosystems, featuring cutting-edge research on ocean conservation. As a marine biologist, Julia was in her element, moving excitedly from display to display while Kieran followed, clearly enjoying her enthusiasm. "This research on coral regeneration is fascinating," she said, examining a detailed model of artificial reef structures. "Some of these methods complement what my team has been working on in the Caribbean." "That's actually why I wanted to bring you here," Kieran admitted. "I thought you might find some of the research relevant to your work." Julia looked at him with surprise. "You arranged this entire evening as a professional courtesy." "No," he said quickly. "I arranged it because I wanted to spend time with you doing something you genuinely enjoy. The professional relevance is just a bonus." His thoughtfulness touched her deeply. "Thank you. This is the most meaningful date I've ever been on." They continued through the exhibition, with Julia providing expert commentary on various displays, and Kieran asking intelligent questions that showed he'd done research of his own. His genuine interest in her field made the evening feel like both a perfect date and a stimulating professional exchange. In front of a massive tank displaying a reconstructed coral reef ecosystem, They paused to watch the colorful fish swimming through the artificially created habitat. "It's beautiful," Kieran murmured, "but I imagine nothing compares to seeing these ecosystems in their natural state." "Nothing does," Julia agreed. "There's something profoundly moving about diving through a healthy reef system, the colors, the diversity, the intricate balance of it all. It's why I became a marine biologist." "When was the last time you went diving for pleasure rather than research?" Kieran asked. Julia thought for a moment. "Probably 2 years ago. Research grants don't typically cover recreational diving trips. Would you consider taking me sometime?" His question was casual but held an underlying significance. "I've done some diving, but never with someone who truly understands what we're seeing." The invitation suggested future plans, a continuation of whatever was developing between them. "I'd like that," Julia replied softly. As they moved through the rest of the exhibition, Kieran maintained a respectful distance, but remained attentive, occasionally brushing his hand against hers or placing it lightly on her back to guide her through a doorway. Each brief contact sent a flutter of awareness through Julia. After completing the exhibition, Kieran surprised her with a picnic dinner set up in the Hall of Ocean Life, directly beneath the museum's famous blue whale model. A small table had been arranged with fine china, crystal glasses, and silver serving dishes. "Is this even allowed?" Julia asked, laughing in disbelief. "Special permission," Kieran explained. "The museum director owes me a favor." "Of course she does," Julia teased, taking her seat. "Is there anyone in New York who doesn't owe you a favor?" "Plenty of people," Kieran replied with a grin. "Including a certain marine biologist who rescued me from a lonely evening at a wine bar." "I thought you rescued me." "Perhaps we rescued each other." He poured champagne into their glasses. "To unexpected meetings and second chances." They clinked glasses, and Julia took a sip of the exquisite champagne while trying to process the surreal experience of dining alone beneath the museum's massive whale model. "I feel like I'm in a movie," she admitted. "Too much?" Kieran asked, suddenly concerned. "I wanted to create something special, but I don't want to overwhelm you." "It's perfect," Julia assured him. "Just not what I'm used to. My dates usually involve crowded restaurants or coffee shops, not private museum viewings and champagne picnics." Kieran nodded in understanding. "I promise future dates can be as simple or elaborate as you prefer. I'm equally happy with takeout and a movie at your place." "Future dates?" Julia raised an eyebrow. "You sound confident." "Hopeful," he corrected with a smile. "I've enjoyed every moment with you, Julia. I'd like to keep exploring whatever this is between us." Their dinner continued with easy conversation that ranged from childhood memories to professional ambitions. Julia found herself opening up about her father's influence on her career choice and her dreams of establishing a marine research center focused on sustainable practices. He believed science and business could work together to solve environmental challenges, she explained. It was a revolutionary idea 20 years ago that conservation and commerce weren't natural enemies. "Your father was ahead of his time," Kieran said. "That's exactly the philosophy I've tried to implement at Grayson Maritime. Sustainable practices aren't just ethically necessary, they're good business in the long run." "He would have liked you," Julia said softly, "though he might have interrogated you about your shipping routes through sensitive marine areas." "I would have welcomed that conversation," Kieran replied seriously. "Fresh perspectives keep us accountable." After dinner, they walked through the empty museum halls, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Julia felt a growing connection with Kieran that transcended his wealth or her initial hesitations. There was an ease between them that she rarely experienced with anyone. When they finally left the museum, The night air was cool against their skin. Kieran's driver waited discreetly in a luxury sedan, but instead of directing them toward it, Kieran gestured toward Central Park across the street. "Would you like to walk for a bit? It's a beautiful night." Julia nodded, and they strolled into the park, their shoulders occasionally brushing. The park was quiet at this hour, with only a few other couples and late-night joggers passing by. "Thank you for tonight," Julia said, breaking the comfortable silence. "It was truly special. I'm glad you enjoyed it." Kieran hesitated before continuing. "I want to be honest with you, Julia. I find myself thinking about you constantly. That hasn't happened to me in a very long time." The vulnerability in his admission touched her deeply. "I've been thinking about you too," she confessed, "even while I was trying to talk myself out of it." Kieran stopped walking, turning to face her. "Why were you trying to talk yourself out of it?" "Because this feels complicated," Julia admitted. "You live in a world so different from mine. I can't help wondering if we're just too different for this to work long term." "Different circumstances don't have to mean different values," Kieran said quietly. "From everything I've seen, we align on the things that truly matter." As they stood facing each other in the soft glow of the park lamps, Julia felt the last of her reservations melting away. When Kieran slowly reached up to brush a strand of hair from her face, his touch lingered against her cheek. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. Instead of answering, Julia rose slightly on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, a tentative exploration that quickly deepened as Kieran's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. Julia's hands found their way to his chest, feeling his heart beating rapidly beneath her palm. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Kieran's eyes were darker than before. "I've been wanting to do that since the night we met," he admitted. "Me too," Julia whispered. They walked back to Kieran's car hand in hand, the connection between them now undeniable. As they drove toward Brooklyn, Julia leaned comfortably against Kieran's shoulder, feeling a contentment that had eluded her for years. At her door, their goodnight kiss was longer, deeper, filled with promise and growing desire. When they finally separated, Kieran brushed his thumb across her lower lip. "When can I see you again?" he asked. "I'm free tomorrow," Julia replied without hesitation. Kieran's smile lit up his face. "Tomorrow it is. Sleep well, Julia." As she watched him leave, Julia knew she was falling for Kieran Grayson not for his wealth or status, but for the man himself, with his thoughtful gestures and genuine respect for her work and passions. Whatever complications might lie ahead seemed worth navigating for the chance to explore this unexpected connection. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind as Julia and Kieran's relationship deepened. Their dates ranged from elaborate experiences like sailing on Kieran's modest yacht, which he insisted was practically a dinghy compared to what most people expected a billionaire to own, to simple evenings cooking dinner at Julia's apartment, where Kieran proved surprisingly skilled in the kitchen. What impressed Julia most was Kieran's consistent thoughtfulness. He remembered details from their conversations and incorporated them into his gestures, sending her articles related to her research, introducing her to colleagues who might be interested in her work, or simply bringing her favorite coffee when he knew she'd had a long day. 4 weeks into their relationship, Julia invited Kieran to a small fundraiser for her marine conservation project. It would be their first public appearance together among her colleagues, and she found herself unexpectedly nervous. "What if everyone thinks I'm dating you for your money?" she asked as they prepared to leave her apartment for the event. Kieran, looking handsome in a simple dark suit, took her hands in his. "Anyone who knows you would never think that, and anyone who matters will see what I see: a brilliant scientist passionate about saving our oceans." And what if they think you're just entertaining yourself with a charity case? She pressed. Then they don't know me at all, he replied seriously. Julia, what we have is real. I haven't felt this way about anyone in years, possibly ever. Don't let other people's potential assumptions rob us of enjoying tonight. His words reassured her, and Julia squeezed his hands gratefully. You're right, I'm being silly. Not silly. Human. Kieran leaned forward to kiss her softly. For what it's worth, I'm nervous too. These are your colleagues, people whose opinions matter to you. I want them to like me for your sake, not because of my bank account. The fundraiser was held at a modest gallery space that had been donated for the evening. As Julia and Kieran entered, she felt several curious glances directed their way. She took a deep breath and led him toward her research team. Everyone, this is Kieran Grayson, she introduced. Kieran, these are my colleagues Sophia, whom you've heard me mention, along with Marcus, Alina, and Dr. Patel, our project director. If her colleagues were impressed by Kieran's status, they didn't show it overtly. Instead, the conversation quickly turned to marine conservation efforts and the intersection with sustainable shipping practices. Your company's initiatives in reducing underwater noise pollution are quite impressive, Dr. Patel said to Kieran. We've been tracking the impact on cetacean migration patterns, and the data is promising. That's good to hear, Kieran replied. We're implementing similar technology across our entire fleet over the next 3 years. I'd be interested in your team's input on our approach. Julia watched with growing pride as Kieran engaged with her colleagues as equals, never condescending or using his influence to dominate the conversation. When the formal presentation portion of the evening began, he sat attentively next to her, his hand occasionally squeezing hers supportively as she delivered her portion of the talk. During the subsequent donation period, Julia noticed Kieran discreetly completing something on his phone. Moments later, Dr. Patel's eyes widened as he checked his own device. We've just received an anonymous donation of $250,000, he announced to the room, visibly moved. Julia turned to Kieran with a questioning look. He shrugged innocently, but his eyes confirmed what she suspected. Anonymous, she whispered. I didn't want to overshadow the other donors, he explained quietly. This should be about the cause, not about me. His humility touched her deeply. While most men of his wealth would have used such a donation to impress, Kieran had deliberately kept his contribution anonymous to avoid stealing focus from the research itself. Later that night, as they walked along the Brooklyn promenade overlooking Manhattan's glittering skyline, Julia stopped to face him. Thank you for tonight, she said softly. Not just for the donation, but for how you were with my colleagues. You treated them with genuine respect. Because they deserve it, Kieran replied simply. The work you're all doing is important. Still, I've seen how some wealthy donors behave at these events like they're doing us a favor just by showing up. Kieran tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch lingering. I never want to be that person, Julia. Wealth is a responsibility, not a badge of superiority. She studied his face in the soft glow of the streetlights, feeling a surge of emotion that she could no longer deny. I think I'm falling in love with you, she admitted, the words escaping before she could second-guess them. Kieran's expression softened, his blue eyes warm with emotion. I know I'm falling in love with you, he replied, pulling her gently into his arms. I've been fighting it because it seemed too soon, but I can't deny what I feel anymore. Their kiss was deep and tender, filled with newfound honesty. When they finally separated, Julia rested her forehead against his. This is happening awfully fast, she murmured. Too fast. He asked, a hint of concern in his voice. Julia shook her head. No, It feels right, despite how unlikely this all seemed a month ago. As they continued their walk, arms wrapped around each other against the cool night air, Julia reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since that fateful bad date. She had entered Levine that night expecting nothing more than an uncomfortable evening to placate her aunt. Instead, she had found a connection that challenged and fulfilled her in ways she hadn't thought possible. For his part, Kieran found himself more open and vulnerable with Julia than he had been with anyone since his father's death. Her authenticity and unwillingness to be impressed by his wealth were refreshing, forcing him to rely on his character rather than his resources to build their relationship. 2 days later, Julia was working late at her lab when her phone rang with Kieran's number. "Hey there," she answered, smiling despite her exhaustion. "I was just thinking about you." "Good thoughts, I hope," he replied, his voice warm. "I have a somewhat impulsive proposal for you. How do you feel about taking a few days off next week?" "That depends on what you have in mind." "I need to visit our research facility in the Florida Keys. They're testing new hull designs to reduce impact on marine ecosystems." Kieran hesitated before continuing. "It occurred to me that the Keys have some of the most beautiful coral reefs in U.S. waters, and you mentioned you haven't been diving for pleasure in years. Are you inviting me on a business trip with diving on the side?" Julia asked, already excited at the prospect. "I'm inviting you on a hybrid work vacation," Kieran clarified. "You could meet our marine research team, share insights from your conservation work. And yes, we could spend at least 2 days diving some of the most beautiful reefs in the country." Julia bit her lip, considering the offer. It was tempting on both professional and personal levels, but she couldn't help worrying about the optics. "Won't your team think it's strange that you're bringing your new girlfriend along?" "Not at all," Kieran assured her. "Your expertise is directly relevant to our research. Besides, I don't hide my personal life from my employees. They know we're seeing each other." After a brief hesitation, Julia made up her mind. "In that case, I'd love to come. I'll need to rearrange a few things, but I think I can make it work." "Perfect," Kieran replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "I'll have my assistant send you the details. We'd leave Monday morning and return Thursday night." As she hung up, Julia felt a flutter of excitement. Not only would this trip allow her to experience the Keys' magnificent reefs, but it would also give her insight into another aspect of Kieran's life, his professional world, and how he operated as the leader of a global company. The following Monday, Julia found herself aboard Kieran's private jet, still adjusting to this new reality where transcontinental travel could be arranged with a phone call. The aircraft was luxurious but tasteful, with comfortable seating and a small working area where Kieran was currently reviewing documents. "Are you sure this isn't too extravagant?" Julia asked, gesturing around the cabin. Kieran looked up from his work with a thoughtful expression. "The jet is a business asset, not a personal indulgence. It allows me to travel efficiently to our global operations." He hesitated before adding, "But I understand if it makes you uncomfortable. We can always fly commercial in the future." "I'm not uncomfortable exactly," Julia clarified. "Just still adjusting to your reality. A month ago, I was celebrating because my research grant got renewed. Now I'm on a private jet to the Florida Keys with a billionaire boyfriend." Kieran set aside his documents and moved to sit beside her. "When you put it that way, it does sound a bit surreal," he admitted. "If it helps, I don't think of myself as a billionaire boyfriend. I'm just a man who's falling in love with an extraordinary woman who happens to be brilliant at saving coral reefs." His words, delivered with such sincerity, melted Julia's momentary hesitation. She leaned over to kiss him softly. Thank you for that perspective, and for inviting me on this trip. Upon landing in Key West, they were met by a driver who took them to a stunning beachfront property, a research facility combined with guest accommodations for visiting Grayson maritime executives and scientists. This is where we'll be staying, Kieran explained as they pulled up to the modern building with expansive ocean views. The research labs are in the East Wing, and there are private quarters in the West Wing. Inside, Julia was impressed by the state-of-the-art facilities dedicated to marine research. Kieran introduced her to his team of scientists and engineers, all clearly respectful of both Kieran and the work they were doing. Miss Vaughn's research on coral reef restoration is groundbreaking, Kieran told his team. I've invited her to share her insights and to give her perspective on our hull design projects. Julia spent the afternoon in fascinating discussions with Kieran's research team, exchanging ideas and finding unexpected synergies between their work. She was particularly impressed by their commitment to environmental considerations, which clearly stemmed from Kieran's leadership. Your team is extraordinary, she told him that evening as they sat on the private terrace of their suite, watching the sunset over the ocean. They're doing work that could revolutionize shipping's environmental impact. That's the goal, Kieran replied, handing her a glass of wine. My father always said that business had a responsibility to leave the world better than we found it. I've tried to make that our guiding principle. He would be proud of what you've accomplished, Julia said softly, noting the flash of emotion in Kieran's eyes at the mention of his father. I hope so, he said quietly. He built the company from nothing with just 2 ships and a determination to succeed. Everything I have, I owe to his vision and hard work. Julia reached for his hand. Tell me more about him. As the sky darkened and stars appeared above them, Kieran shared stories of his father, a self-made man who had valued integrity above all else, who had taught Kieran to sail when he was 5, who had included his son in business discussions from an early age to instill both responsibility and perspective. He sounds remarkable, Julia said when Kieran finally fell silent. I wish I could have met him. He would have adored you, Kieran replied with certainty. Not just for your intelligence, but for your authenticity. He had no patience for pretense. Like father, like son, Julia observed, squeezing his hand. The following day was devoted to diving, with Kieran arranging for a private boat and expert guide to take them to some of the Key's most pristine reef locations. Underwater, Julia was in her element, pointing out rare species and explaining the complex ecosystem to Kieran, who proved to be a skilled and attentive diving partner. In the clear turquoise waters, surrounded by vibrant coral formations and colorful fish, they communicated through hand signals and shared glances that conveyed their mutual appreciation for the natural wonders around them. At one point, a sea turtle glided past, regarding them with ancient eyes before disappearing into the blue distance. Later, as they rested on the boat between dives, Kieran watched Julia with undisguised admiration as she enthusiastically explained the spawning patterns of the coral they had observed. What? She asked, catching his expression. I love seeing you like this, he replied simply. Passionate in your element, you light up when you talk about your work. Julia felt a blush rise to her cheeks. It's how I feel when I watch you with your research team. There's something attractive about competence and purpose. Indeed there is, Kieran agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. That night, their relationship deepened as they made love for the first time, their connection as natural and profound as it had been unexpected when they first met. Afterward, lying in Kieran's arms with the sound of waves outside their window, Julia felt a sense of rightness that transcended the unlikely circumstances that had brought them together. "I love you," Kieran whispered against her hair. "I know it's fast, but I'm certain." Julia raised herself on one elbow to look into his eyes. "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling both momentous and natural. "And yes, it's fast, but sometimes the right things are." The remainder of their trip continued to strengthen both their personal and professional connections. Julia provided valuable insights to Kieran's team, while also enjoying the rare luxury of diving some of the world's most beautiful reefs with someone she was growing to love more deeply each day. On their final evening in the Keys, Kieran arranged a private dinner on the beach, with lanterns illuminating a table set at the water's edge. As they enjoyed the exquisite meal prepared by the facility's chef, Julia found herself reflecting on the whirlwind changes in her life. "Penny for your thoughts?" Kieran asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was just thinking about how much has changed since that awful blind date," she replied with a smile. "If Richard hadn't been such a terrible date, you might never have intervened." "I've actually considered sending him a thank you gift," Kieran admitted with a laugh. "His loss was definitely my gain." "Mine too," Julia said softly, "though I'm still adjusting to all this." She gestured to the elegant private dinner setting. Kieran's expression turned serious. "Julia, I need you to know something. All of this, the jet, the facilities, the private dinners, they're just circumstances, not who I am. What matters to me is building a life with someone who shares my values and challenges me to be better. That's what I've found with you." His sincerity moved her deeply. "I know that, Kieran. It's why I fell in love with you, not for what you have, but for who you are." As they returned to New York the following day, both Julia and Kieran felt the shift in their relationship. What had begun as an impulsive rescue at a wine bar had evolved into something profound and lasting. A partnership based on mutual respect, shared values, and deepening love. Over the following months, their relationship continued to grow. Julia became more comfortable with Kieran's world, while he found joy in the simpler pleasures of hers. They established a rhythm that balanced their professional commitments with their desire to be together, spending weekends at either Julia's Brooklyn apartment or Kieran's Manhattan penthouse. 6 months after their first meeting, Kieran invited Julia to accompany him to his family's annual charity gala, an event that would introduce her to his mother and extended family for the first time. Despite her growing confidence in their relationship, Julia found herself unexpectedly nervous as the evening approached. "What if your mother doesn't approve of me?" she asked as they prepared in Kieran's penthouse. "I'm hardly the socialite heiress she probably imagined for you." Kieran, adjusting his bow tie in the mirror, turned to face her. "My mother wants one thing for me: happiness. And you, Julia Vaughn, make me happier than I've ever been." Julia smoothed down her emerald evening gown, a designer creation that Kieran had insisted on having made for her, despite her initial protests. "Still, there's a world of difference between a billionaire shipping magnate and a marine biologist with student loans." "A world of difference in circumstances, perhaps," Kieran conceded, crossing the room to take her hands. "But not in what matters. Besides, my mother was a kindergarten teacher before she married my father. She has no patience for social pretensions." This revelation surprised Julia. "You never mentioned that." "Didn't I?" Kieran looked thoughtful. "She always said it was the perfect training for raising a stubborn child and managing my father's business associates. She'll adore you, Julia. Trust me." As they entered the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where the Grayson Family Foundation held its annual gala, Julia felt the curious glances of New York's elite. Kieran, seemingly oblivious to the attention, kept his hand at the small of her back, a reassuring presence as they navigated the glittering crowd. "Kieran, darling." An elegant woman in her 60s approached them, her warm smile immediately setting Julia at ease. "And you must be Julia. I've heard so much about you." "Mother," Kieran said, kissing her cheek. "This is Julia Vaughn." "Julia, my mother, Kieran Grayson." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Grayson," Julia said, extending her hand. Kieran bypassed the handshake to pull Julia into a gentle hug. "Kieran, please." "And the pleasure is all mine. Kieran hasn't stopped talking about you for months. I was beginning to think he'd invented you." "Mother," Kieran protested, though his expression was affectionate. "Oh, hush," Kieran told her son before turning back to Julia. "He tells me you're doing important work with coral reef restoration. I'd love to hear more about it. Kieran's father and I always believed that environmental stewardship should be central to the company's mission." Julia found herself immediately drawn to Kieran's genuine warmth and interest. As the evening progressed, she relaxed into conversations with Kieran's family and their circle of friends, many of whom shared their commitment to environmental causes. "Your mother is wonderful," she told Kieran as they shared a dance later in the evening. "Nothing like I expected." "What did you expect?" he asked, guiding her smoothly across the dance floor. "I don't know. Someone more intimidating, more concerned with status and appearances." Kieran laughed softly. "She saves that for the board members who try to cut corners on our environmental initiatives. With family and people she cares about, she's always been this warm." As the orchestra began a new song, Kieran guided Julia toward one of the museum's quieter galleries, where they could speak more privately. "What did I do to deserve this escape?" Julia asked, grateful for the respite from the crowded ballroom. "I wanted a moment alone with you," Kieran explained, leading her toward a bench positioned before an ancient Greek sculpture. "And there's something I wanted to ask you." Julia's heart began to beat faster as Kieran took both her hands in his expression suddenly serious. "These past 6 months have been the happiest of my life," he began. "When I intervened in your terrible date that night, I had no idea I was actually changing the course of my own life." "Mine too," Julia said softly. "I know our relationship developed quickly," Kieran continued. "And I know there have been adjustments on both sides, but I've never been more certain of anything than I am of my love for you." To Julia's surprise, Kieran lowered himself to one knee before her, still holding her hands. From his pocket, he produced a small velvet box. "Julia Vaughn, you've brought meaning and purpose into my life that I never knew was missing. You challenge me, inspire me, and make me want to be worthy of your love every day." He opened the box to reveal a stunning emerald ring surrounded by small diamonds. "Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Julia felt tears forming in her eyes as she looked from the ring to Kieran's hopeful face. Despite the whirlwind nature of their relationship, she had no doubt about her answer. "Yes," she whispered, and then more confidently, "Yes, Kieran, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. Rising to his feet, he gathered her into his arms for a kiss that conveyed all the emotion words couldn't express. When they finally separated, Julia glanced down at the ring. "It's beautiful. The color matches your eyes," Kieran finished, "and reminds me of the ocean you love so much. I wanted something that reflected who you are, not just a traditional diamond." The thoughtfulness behind his choice moved Julia deeply. "It's perfect. I love it, and I love you." As they returned to the gala to share their news with Kieran, who embraced Julia with tears of joy and whispered, "I've been hoping for this since he first mentioned your name." Julia marveled at the unlikely journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a terrible blind date had, through Kieran's impulsive intervention, transformed into the greatest love either of them had known. Their backgrounds and circumstances couldn't have been more different, but their values and visions for the future aligned in ways that made those differences insignificant. As guests offered congratulations and champagne flowed, Julia found herself embraced not just by Kieran, but by his entire world, a world that no longer felt foreign or intimidating, but increasingly like a place where she belonged, not despite her differences, but because of the unique perspective she brought to it. Later that night, as they stood on the terrace of Kieran's penthouse overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline, he wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Completely," she replied, leaning back against his chest. "Though I'm still processing the fact that I'm engaged to a man I met because he rescued me from a bad date 6 months ago. It was the best impulse decision I ever made," Kieran murmured against her hair, "and one I'll never regret." As they stood together under the stars, Julia knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, navigating their different worlds, balancing their careers, building a shared life, they would face them together. Their unlikely beginning having forged a bond that was as deep as it was unexpected. In the months that followed, Julia and Kieran's lives merged with surprising ease. They decided to make Kieran's penthouse their primary residence while keeping Julia's Brooklyn apartment for when she needed to work late at her lab. Their wedding planning reflected both their values. An intimate ceremony focused on meaningful connections rather than extravagance. 8 months after their engagement, they were married on the deck of a Grayson maritime research vessel, anchored near a protected reef sanctuary that Julia's team had helped restore. The bride wore a simple but elegant gown, carrying a bouquet of native coastal flowers. The groom couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him, escorted by her uncle. Their vows, written by each of them, spoke of unexpected beginnings, the courage to embrace love despite differences, and commitments not just to each other, but to the values they shared, particularly their dedication to protecting the oceans that had played such a pivotal role in bringing them together. Eleanor, watching her son pledge his life to the woman who had captured his heart, wiped tears of joy from her eyes. "William would have loved her," she whispered to her sister, speaking of her late husband. "She reminds me of me when I first met him, unimpressed by his position, and completely in love with the man himself." After the ceremony and a reception that blended elegant touches with genuine warmth, Kieran surprised Julia by revealing their honeymoon destination: a month-long journey aboard a state-of-the-art research vessel, visiting remote coral reef systems around the world. It was the perfect combination of their passions, her marine biology and his shipping expertise, wrapped in the luxury of uninterrupted time together. "You've thought of everything," Julia said in wonder as he showed her the itinerary, which included not only romantic destinations but opportunities to meet with leading marine researchers at each location. "I wanted our first journey as husband and wife to honor both of us," Kieran replied. "Besides, I've always found you most beautiful when you're enthusiastic about your research. Purely selfish motivations," Julia laughed, pulling him close. "I love you, Kieran Grayson." "And I love you, Julia Grayson," he replied, still marveling at how right her name sounded with his. Their honeymoon was everything they had hoped for, a perfect balance of research, adventure, and romance. They dove on pristine reefs, met with scientists doing groundbreaking work in marine conservation, and spent long evenings planning their future together. One night, as they sat on the deck of their vessel under a canopy of stars somewhere in the South Pacific, Kieran broached a subject they had discussed only theoretically before. "I've been thinking," he began, his arm around Julia as they gazed at the phosphorescent waves. "About the Marine Research Foundation you've always wanted to establish," Julia nodded. "It's still my long-term dream, someday." "What if someday could be sooner?" Kieran suggested. "I've had my legal team draw up preliminary papers for the Vaughn Marine Conservation Foundation, with an initial endowment that would allow you to expand your current research exponentially." Julia sat up, turning to face him. "Kieran, I don't even know what to say, but are you sure?" "That's a significant commitment." "I've never been more certain," he assured her. "Your work is important, Julia, and not just to me because I love you, but to the world. I have resources that can help advance that work. It seems like the perfect synergy." "But I don't want people to think I married you for financial backing," Julia said, voicing her main concern. "Anyone who knows you would never think that," Kieran replied. "Besides, the foundation would be independently governed with a board of respected marine scientists. Your work and reputation would speak for themselves." As Julia considered his offer, she realized that their marriage had already transcended the initial concerns about their different backgrounds. Together, they had the opportunity to create something meaningful that combined her scientific expertise with his business acumen and resources. "Thank you," she said finally, emotion making her voice unsteady. "Not just for the foundation, but for believing in my work this way." "Always," Kieran promised, pulling her close again. "We're partners in everything now." Upon their return to New York, they settled into married life with a harmony that surprised even those closest to them. Julia's foundation was established and quickly gained respect in the scientific community for its innovative approach to marine conservation. Meanwhile, Kieran continued to expand Grayson Maritime's sustainable practices, with Julia's insights informing many of their new initiatives. 2 years into their marriage, as they celebrated the anniversary of their first meeting at Vaughn, the wine bar where it all began, Kieran presented Julia with a small, carefully wrapped package. "What's this?" she asked, setting aside her wine glass to accept the gift. "Open it and see," he replied, watching her with barely contained excitement. Inside, she found a tiny pair of baby booties in soft ocean blue, accompanied by a miniature diving mask. Julia's eyes filled with tears as she looked up at her husband. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Kieran nodded, taking her hands in his. "The foundation is established, the new eco-friendly fleet is launched, and our lives are stable. I thought perhaps it might be time to consider the next adventure, if you're ready." "A baby," Julia whispered, her heart full. "Our baby. What do you think?" Kieran asked, his expression a mixture of hope and vulnerability that still melted her heart after all this time. In answer, Julia leaned across the table to kiss him tenderly. "I think it's perfect timing. I've been thinking about it too, but wasn't sure if you were ready." "I've been ready since the day I married you," Kieran admitted, "but I wanted us to have time to establish our life together first." As they left the wine bar hand in hand, both filled with excitement about this new chapter in their journey, Julia couldn't help marveling once again at the unlikely path that had brought them together. "Do you ever think about how different our lives would be if you hadn't overheard my terrible date that night?" she asked as they walked through the cool autumn evening, so similar to the night they first met. "I try not to," Kieran replied with a gentle squeeze of her hand. "The thought of never knowing you is unbearable now." "My knight in shining Armani," Julia teased, echoing her words from that first night. "Who knew a bad date could lead to all this?" "I didn't rescue you because I was looking for love," Kieran said thoughtfully. "I just couldn't bear to see someone being treated so disrespectfully. But the moment you smiled, really smiled, not that polite grimace you were giving your date, I was captivated." "And I thought you were just being kind," Julia replied. I had no idea you were making it your mission to see me again." "Best mission of my life," Kieran said, pulling her close as they walked toward home and their future together. 1 year later, they welcomed their daughter, Eleanor Sophia Grayson, named for Kieran's mother and Julia's closest friend. As they stood together by the nursery window in their home, watching their newborn sleep, Kieran wrapped his arms around his wife from behind. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder, "just like her mother." Julia leaned back against him, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For overhearing my terrible date, for caring enough to intervene, for everything that's happened since." She turned in his arms to face him. "I love our story, Kieran." "So do I," he replied, kissing her gently. "Every unexpected, wonderful chapter of it." As their daughter stirred in her crib, Kieran and Julia stood together, united by a love that had begun with a simple act of kindness in a wine bar and had grown into a partnership that enriched not just their own lives but the world around them. Their unlikely beginning had led to the most perfect ending either of them could have imagined: a family founded on mutual respect, shared values, and a love that had recognized no barriers of circumstance or background. Just two people who had found in each other exactly what they hadn't known they were looking for. And it had all started because a billionaire overheard her bad date at a wine bar, stepped in to rescue her, and made it his mission to see her again.